This is part 2 on the video lecture for Chapter 5, Human Population Growth. In part 1, we ended talking about how wealth correlates with birth rates, and we were showing you how the world's wealthiest nations tend to have less children, whereas the world's larger populations tend to have more children, and this graph was a wonderful image of that. And so since we just talked about birth rates, let's talk about death rates. So death rates, birth rates, remember, were influenced by wealth as well. Death rates are also influenced by wealth. The nations that have increased nutrition, healthcare, and sanitation, of course, have lower death rates because they have access to clean water, they have access to medical care. And infant mortality rate is a big thing, and this is the percentage of infants that die before the age of 1. Of course, this reduces with wealth. Poor countries rate 18 times higher of infant mortality rate, and this is a big deal. So it's the percent of infants within a population who die before the age of 1. It's really heavily influenced by sanitation, water quality, and the availability of health care after birth. Babies born in poorer countries, of course, are particularly vulnerable to disease and malnutrition during their first year of life. What's really shocking is that actually the U.S. has one of the highest infant mortality rates for children in developed countries, and one of this is because of the expense of healthcare. So we can move all the way to the other end of the spectrum. So lack of healthcare, but also access to healthcare, and these are big deals in terms of infant mortality rate. When we talk about death rates, we want to also talk about survivorship, and survivorship is the number of years a member of a specific group lives. So 60% survive to the age of 25, and of course this really deals with wealth, of course, wealth of a country, but sex actually affects this. So females statistically outlive males, and so this is a really an interesting statistical analysis. Now, also when we look at life expectancy, this is of the country as a whole. So survivorship is usually within a specific age group. Life expectancy is the overall median age. So remember, this is an average. This isn't, because a lot of people, I'll talk to them about life expectancy, oh, well, my grandma lived to 106. I understand that, but it's the average as a whole. The United States, you can see, was about 77 years for boys and 82.1 for girls. Globally, the life expectancy has increased from the age of 45 to 68 in the past 5 decades, which is a huge increase. Now that people are living longer, though, don't forget resources now are strained longer. So there's consequences to this. The other thing is that the U.S. has recently put out statistical research that shows that for the first time, the next generation will actually have a lower life expectancy than the previous one, and one of the biggest reasons for that is obesity. So, and I don't mean by years, I'm talking like those 0.2s. So for example, the U.S. may fall to 77.3 years for boys and, maybe 81.8 years for girls, but that's a huge problem because one of the big things is that as we move forward in life expectancy, we really expect the standards of that country to increase, but in fact, we have increased obesity rates to an astronomical level. And there's wonderful tools that you can use to look up life expectancy. I hate to use Wikipedia, but sometimes it's really a good little tool to use. Want to go to it. Whoops, I spelled life expectancy wrong, but it's just a really easy way that we can show you some of the countries' life expectancy by country. I think it's on here. No, it's not. Life expectancy by country, and you can see Japan. sorry if I can. Japan has the highest life expectancy with females at 86. Switzerland is up there. And look at the diets of some of these countries. It's a really big deal. The diet does play a role in life expectancy rates in these countries. So I just want to see if I can find where the U.S. actually falls pretty low. So here's the list of life expectancy. I was like looking at this. You can see Japan is up there, Switzerland, you could see, and then the United States actually falls pretty far down this list. Keep going. There we are. So life expectancy, 81.6 for females, 76.9 for males. You can see that has dropped from the slide from 2010. So you can see that this is a big deal to have that dropped. And one of the interesting thing is I always like looking at the lowest life expectancies, which is really sad. So Chad, you could see that the life expectancy is very low. You're talking in your 50s. So I'm very close to my highest life expectancy if I lived in Chad or Uganda or Burkina Faso or Niger. So this is really sad to see that these, you're in your prime when you're in your 20s because you're halfway through life. Whereas in the United States, you're talking overall higher levels by 30-some years. And that, of course, has to do with the wealth of the nation, access to resources, sanitation, medical care, war. Of course, war plays a huge role in this as well, or genocides, etc. So this big deal. So here we go. This will show you infant mortality rates in the 10 poorest countries are 10 to 20 times higher than the 10 wealthiest countries. But if you look here, the United States actually has, out of the wealthy countries, has the highest infant mortality rate. And that's huge. And that all has to do with prenatal care. A lot of it is people don't receive the best prenatal care. And that's because of lack of access to health care. Age class. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is age structure, and this is determined by survivorship and age-specific birth rate. And we use these age structure pyramids to show this. It's a graphical display of age structure, and the shape indicates the rate of population growth. These are really good graphs to look at. So here's Ethiopia versus the United States. In 2010, the median age in Ethiopia was half that of the United States. A much larger portion of Ethiopia's population falls in the reproductive ages of 15 to 49 years of age. And when we see this, we mean when a large amount of your population falls in that reproductive age, then guess what that means? That there's more chances that that population is going to grow, because if more people are in that fertility age range, then more people are viable to have more children. And so that's one of the big things we look at. These kind of maps that look like this is what world population experts want to see, because this means that the population is in stability, whereas this means the population is in growth stage. And here you can see Canada in 2010 versus Canada in 2050, and Niger in 2010 versus Niger in 2050. You could see the significant differences in their age-dependent fertility rates and survivorship. And these differences, of course, are projected results in very different population sizes and age structures by 2050. But you could see that Niger's still in that growth period. It's still in the growth period because the median age moved from 16 to 21, but this is still in the fertility range. Whereas the median age in Canada fell from 37 to 45, and 45 is almost getting to that upper age of fertility rate. So how do populations move? So this kind of ends our talk about really facts in terms of population. So birth rate, death rate, survivorship, infant mortality rate. Now we're moving into how do global populations move, how do they vary? Well, a lot of different reasons. Of course, migration, a big hot topic in the world today, the relocation of humans, and this happens usually because of push and pull factors. So push factors are what pushes people out of a specific country. Pull factors are what pull people in. And two important terms in terms of migration are immigration and emigration. Immigration is you're moving into a new area, and that's because you're being pulled there for specific reasons, sometimes because of freedom, education, better job, etc. Emigration means you move out of a specific area, and a lot of times you move out of an area because you're pushed out. And a lot of times you're pushed out because of war, famine, oppression, persecution, lack of jobs, etc. So you're pushed out. And what we call net migration, of course, is the difference between immigration and emigration. So, big deal. So here is net migration rate percentages, and if you look at world's wealthiest nations versus the world's poorest nations, you can see this. So the pull of a favorable economic and social conditions produce positive net migrations in wealthy countries, but patterns of migration for poor nations are more complex, being influenced by internal push factors as well as conditions in neighboring countries. And so you can see that sometimes they have negative net migration. And of course, migration, big issue today, big issue. Thomas Malthus, which is an article I ask you to read, and he lived in the 1700s. It's a large article, but remember, you want to kind of just breeze through it. And one of the big things he talked about was that populations are growing exponentially. And he talked about this in the 1700s. But the resources upon which humans depend typically, of course, do not grow exponentially. But one of the things in the 1700s was Thomas Malthus couldn't predict the amount of mass industrial agriculture that we have today, as well as globalization, the movement of food across boundaries, etc. So although his prediction is false right now, it doesn't mean it can't come true, because remember, a lot of times our food, the way that we grow our food is we grow these monocrops. So if something happened to one of our monocrops, like corn, it could definitely ruin our entire industrial food system, which could then, of course, impact population and resources. So if you could read over that, it would be really good. But his prediction was, he really wanted to say that as population exponentially increases, the resources will force that population to go into poverty and become well diminished. And this was him giving those talks about population. So what are the forecasts for the future of population? Well, it's very hard to predict a specific population and what it will be. So this is why a lot of people don't like it, or they just don't take it seriously, because we have been wrong in the past in predicting it. The United Nations says probably by 2050 we'll reach the 9 billion mark. And a lot of people say that carrying capacity will be what we see as the carrying capacity line, which is the amount of resources that the human population can sustain, is about 10 billion. It doesn't mean that that can't change a little bit, but we should be thinking about the future and thinking about population and where we're headed. So let's just briefly talk about that. Carrying capacity is the size of the population that the environment can sustain. As population approaches that carrying capacity, death rates increase, birth rates decrease because there's lack of food, lack of resources. And in order to be sustainable as a human race, we need to stay below that carrying capacity line, because if not, what will happen is there'll be a huge dieback of the human population. And a lot of people, when we see that, you're talking billions of people dead because of lack of resources. So one way, of course, that we can decrease our, the amount of resources that we use is by decreasing our ecological footprint as a human, especially in the United States. You can see here, look at how large our ecological footprint is compared to that of a Haitian citizen. And this is just because we just use so much more. Our houses are ginormous. And even just a row home in the city is bigger than most people in Haiti who have a little shanty shack that they have. We use way more water than everybody else. We use way more resources. So this is a big deal. It's an ecological footprint is the area of land needed to supply resources consumed, and the size of the footprint, of course, varies between countries. And so here you have your poorer countries versus your developed and your wealthy countries, and you can see the countries become more affluent, their footprints are increasingly determined by the extraction and burning of fossil fuels and the generation of electric power. So as we become more developed, we access more fossil fuels because we have cars and we have bigger houses, so we need more electricity, etc. And it just goes on and on. So I'm going to end part 2 of population right here, and then we'll pick up on part 3 next.